welcome to Crimes Through Time, a weekly snapshot of crime history. In the early morning hours of the 6th of November 1930, two men walking home spotted a fire burning in the distance. Nothing aroused their suspicions, after all it had just been Guy Fawkes' night, until they encountered a smartly dressed man walking briskly away from the general direction of the fire. Odd, given the time of night. The men approached the blaze and discovered it to be a Morris Minor car. In the driver's seat, the charred remains of a man would be uncovered. The case would become known as the Blazing Car Murder, a senseless crime committed by a smartly dressed man wishing to escape his responsibilities and start a new life. The identity of the victim to this day remains unknown. Let's explore the case of Alfred Arthur Rouse, hanged for the murder of the unknown man. Alfred Arthur Rouse was born on the 6th of April 1894 in Milkwood Road, Herne Hill, London. He had two siblings and was raised by his aunt for the majority of his childhood. His father, Walter Edward Rouse, a hosier, was unable to care for his children after the breakdown of the marriage, and Alfred's mother left the family. He attended the local council school and was described as a well-behaved, bright and athletic boy. His first job after leaving school at 14 was in an office in an estate agent's. He then went on to work for a manufacturing company. However, Alfred didn't give up on learning. He trained as a carpenter and attended several evening classes. He had a lovely baritone voice and was a skilled musician, playing the piano, violin and mandolin. In 1909, he was able to put his carpentry training to use when he was employed by a furniture manufacturer located in the West End of London. It was around this time he met Lily May Watkins at a local dance. All was well until 1914 and the outbreak of World War I. Just 4 days after war broke out, Alfred enlisted in the British Army and joined the 24th Queen's Regiment as a private. As many couples did, Alfred and Lily married while he was training in England, preparing for his inevitable departure for the front line in France. They wed at St Saviour's Church, St Albans, on the 29th of November 1914. Alfred would arrive in France on the 15th of March 1915. Firstly, he was stationed in Paris, where he managed to father an illegitimate child. His unit was sent to fight at the Battle of Festubert in Artois. The battle began on the 15th of May, and on the last day of fighting, a high explosive shell exploded near his head, causing injury to his head, knee and thigh as he was shot with shrapnel, leaving him unconscious. He would remain unconscious for some time, only coming to on the train as it passed through Bedford on the way to the UK Ministry of Defence Hospital Unit. Alfred would be in hospital for almost a year, undergoing surgeries to remove shrapnel embedded in his head and leg. He would be left with some disabilities. He was unable to bend his knee and developed edema, making walking hard. He recuperated at military hospitals in Leeds and Clacton-on-Sea. This led to his discharge from the army on the 11th of February 1916. His pension award was 20 shillings a week. Alfred returned to his wife in Stoke Newington. It would take 4 long years, but incredibly Alfred was able to return to full health, to the point that in August 1920 he was given a last examination by the military doctors. His head injury was found to have been completely healed and the limitations on his movement vastly improved, mainly due to his hard work as a member of the local tennis club. His military pension was cancelled that September and he received a final payment of £41 and 5 shillings. This opened the door for Alfred to return to work. From the beginning of 1920, he had taken on several small jobs of increasing physicality, usually involving vehicles. He had soon become a skilled mechanic. Also in 1920, Alfred began to have affairs. Alfred is often portrayed as a charismatic playboy whose high sex drive drove him to promiscuity, but I think he was a much darker character. The first known girl in England was a 14-year-old from Edinburgh. She would become pregnant at 15. He would abandon her in a home for unwed mothers where she was left to give birth alone. In 1925, he would start an affair with Nellie Tucker, a domestic servant from Hendon. Their baby girl was born in 1928. He again tried to walk away, but Nellie obtained a child support order from the court. In June 1929, Alfred took employment as a commercial traveller, essentially a travelling salesman, for Messrs Martins, a Leicester-based company selling garters and braces. He would travel around the south coast and the Midlands area, earning £4 a week. Alfred used this nomadic lifestyle to engage in further affairs. He would pose as a single man, a successful London entrepreneur who would promise them he would marry them. In fact, he was known to have bigamously married at least 3 of these women. He fathered many illegitimate children through these relationships. He was very successful at his job and would earn enough money to obtain a mortgage on a house in Buxted Road, Fryden Barnet, London, for himself, wife Lily and their son. In the summer of 1930, he purchased a 1928 Morris Minor, registration MU 1468. The consequences of Alfred's many lives were beginning to take its toll in 1930. Nellie was now pregnant with their second child, another baby girl that would be born on the 29th of October. Phyllis Jenkins, who lived in Wales, was also heavily pregnant. Both were expecting him to marry them soon. Nellie already had a child support order against him, and there were several others filed with the court with impending judgments from women in the UK, as well as the woman from Paris. The financial strain was huge. It was at this point Alfred began to formulate a plan. He, quote, wanted to start afresh. He decided he would fake his own death and simply walk away from his responsibilities. Around 1:50 a.m. on the 6th of November 1930, cousins Alfred Brown and William Bailey were returning home after celebrating Guy Fawkes Night. They walked along Hardingston Lane and Northampton towards Hardingston Village when they spotted a fire in the distance. There was nothing suspicious about this. They made the reasonable assumption it was a bonfire, until they encountered a smartly dressed man carrying an attaché case, briskly walking away from the location of the fire. Alfred Brown remarked to the man about the fire, and he replied, quote, looks like someone's having a bonfire up there. He walked past the 2 men in the direction of the Northampton to London road. The cousins approached the fire and discovered it was actually a Morris Minor car, ablaze in the verge on the side of the country lane. They quickly summoned the 2 local constables to the scene. By the time Constable Harry Bertie Copping arrived, the flames were 12 feet high. The 4 men used the water from a nearby pond to douse the flames. What they discovered was horrific. The charred remains of a corpse lay across the front seats, with the head on the driver's side. The right arm was completely burnt off at the elbow. A wooden mallet with 3 human hairs attached and a jerry can were recovered at the scene. Alfred Brown and William Bailey were able to give a detailed description of the smartly dressed man to the police, who put out an appeal for him to come forward. The local and national newspapers covered the blazing car murder, as it became known, extensively on the 7th of November. But the crime scene had already turned all eyes to Alfred Rouse, because even though the car was utterly destroyed, the number plate survived and was readable, MU 1468, registered to Alfred at his London address. The investigation split into 2 focuses: the forensic analysis of the car and post-mortem of the victim, and tracking down Alfred Rouse. It was quickly determined that the fire was set deliberately. A joint on the feeding pipe between the petrol tank and the carburettor of the vehicle had been loosened, allowing petrol to flow freely into and underneath the car, which was then ignited. Blood tests and the presence of particulates in the air passages of the lungs indicated that the victim was alive, albeit unconscious when the fire was started. A small mercy is that the pathologist believed he died within minutes of the blaze starting and wouldn't have woken up. It was clear to the police that this was murder. Police arrived at Buxted Road and interviewed Lily Rouse. She told them Alfred had left the house around 8:30 p.m. on the 5th of November for a business meeting. He arrived home around 2 a.m. This detail she got wrong. Now, whether she was mistaken or got it wrong on purpose is unclear. Lily was asked to help identify the victim. The body was too damaged for her to see, but she was asked to look at some scraps of clothing and a wallet containing 30 shillings, which was found on the victim. She couldn't be certain that the clothes were Alfred's, but the wallet definitely was. Alfred had hitchhiked from the crime scene to London and arrived home with Lily at around 6:20 a.m, but he had stayed little more than 30 minutes. He boarded a train to Wales to visit his pregnant mistress, Phyllis Jenkins. Alfred explained that his car had been stolen and that is why there had been such a delay in his arrival. Phyllis encouraged him to report the theft to the police and the insurance company. He reassured her that he had taken care of it all. Phyllis saw the reports of the car fire in the newspaper and questioned Alfred over whether it was his car. He denied it, despite his number plate being clearly readable. The reports speculated that the victim in the car was the owner, but they were sure it was murder. Alfred decided to take a coach from Cardiff to Hammersmith Broadway, and he left at 10 a.m. Phyllis was suspicious, and as soon as Alfred left, she contacted the local police and reported that Alfred had been at her home and where he was headed. The Metropolitan Police were informed of Alfred's imminent arrival in London, and when he stepped off the coach at Hammersmith Coach Terminal, Detective Sergeant Skelly was waiting. On seeing the inspector, Alfred remarked, quote, "I am glad it's all over. I was going to Scotland Yard about it. I was responsible. I am very glad it's over. I have had no sleep." He was collected by police from Northamptonshire to be interviewed. His first explanation was that it was all an accident. He had picked up a hitchhiker on the Great North Road towards the Midlands. They had become lost and ended up on Hardingston Lane. While there, he stopped for a toilet break, taking his suitcase with him, apparently. He asked the man to fill the petrol tank using the jerry can from the boot, while he smoked a cigar that Alfred had given him. It was very helpful that he just happened to have a cigar to give him, because Alfred was a non-smoker. Alfred turned around to find the car on fire and the man trapped inside. Panicked, he fled the scene. They confronted him with the forensic findings regarding the loosened feed pipe. Alfred was adamant that it was all a tragic accident caused by a drunk man filling a car with petrol while smoking a cigar. When confused police inquired about him taking his suitcase to answer a call of nature, Alfred accused the man of previously having tried to open it, so he took it to be safe. On the 27th of November 1930, Alfred appeared at Northampton Assizes to be formally charged with the murder of the unknown man. A plea of not guilty was entered and the trial was set for the 26th of January 1931. The trial lasted 6 days. Mr. Justice Talbot presided. The prosecution was led by William Norman Burkitt. Their case centred on Alfred Rouse being a philandering spouse whose world was about to collapse under the financial consequences of his duplicitous life, leading him to hatch a plan to fake his own death and make a fresh start. The defence was led by Donald Finnemore. Their case was that this was a tragic accident and all Alfred was guilty of was panicking and leaving the scene. Sir Bernard Spilsbury and Dr. Eric Shaw conducted the post-mortem. They both testified that the victim was unconscious when the fire began, theorising that the mallet found close to the scene was used to knock the man out. Spilsbury further testified that the presence of petrol from the fork of the victim's trousers proved that petrol was doused over him and the car prior to the fire starting. The defence countered, saying the presence of the petrol and the fragments of trousers were caused by the man stumbling while filling the car from the jerry can under the influence of alcohol. An engineer took the stand to say that under extreme heat the joint on the feed-in pipe can become loose and that the disconnection was because of the fire and not the cause of it. The Government Fire and Insurance Inspector Colonel Cuthbert Buckle demonstrated to the jury that the fire was caused by, quote, human agency, and that the lock nut of the petrol feeding pipe was manually tampered with. Alfred Brown was called to the stand to formally identify the man he saw walking away from the crime scene that night. When challenged by the prosecution about how he could be so certain, he answered, quote, Well, when you go home at that time in the morning, you do not usually see well-dressed men getting out of a ditch, which is a very fair point. William Burkitt then turned to Alfred and his complicated personal life. It had come to light that months prior to the fire, Alfred had had the foresight to take out an insurance policy which would pay £1,000 in the event of the accidental death of the owner-driver of his vehicle. The benefactor was his legal wife Lily and their now 6-year-old son. 3 of his mistresses took the stand to show that, quote, Rouse's domestic life was not what it should have been. One of those mistresses was Phyllis, who had rung the police when he had left her home. She testified that he had smelt of petrol when he arrived on the 6th of November and that his eyebrows were scorched. Then Alfred himself took the stand. As is often the case, he performed poorly. Coming across smug and overly confident, he was repeatedly forced to admit to lies and contradictions about his actions and movements. He couldn't provide adequate explanations as to why he had given so many differing accounts. In his closing remarks to the jury, Mr. Justice Talbot said, quote, Of course, there can be no doubt about it that these facts create grave suspicion against this man, who was the owner of the car, and who drove it to the place where it was burned. If he is an innocent man, he has created a grave suspicion against himself by his own folly. The jury took just 75 minutes to reach a guilty verdict, and he was sentenced to death on the 31st of January 1931. Alfred would at first calmly listen to his fate before shouting to the judge, quote, I am innocent, sir. An appeal was lodged on the grounds that the introduction of his, quote, immoral character, in particular the presence of his mistresses, had unfairly influenced the jury. It was heard on the 23rd of February 1931 and was unsuccessful. The discussion of his character was directly linked to the motive for the crime and therefore not prejudicial. Alfred would never formally confess to the police, but he would write a letter to the Daily Sketch newspaper giving a full account of his guilt, which was published after his execution. This is an extract. Quote, Nellie Tucker was expecting another child, and I was expecting to hear from Phyllis similar news. There were many difficulties, and I was fed up. I wanted to start life afresh. In the autumn of last year, something happened which made me think again. A man spoke to me near the Swan and Pyramid public house. He was a down and out, and he told me the usual hard luck story. I took him into the public house, and he had some beer. I had lemonade. Of course, I paid for the drinks. He told me he usually hung around there. He did not tell me his name, but he did say that he had no relations and was looking for work, and that he was in the habit of getting lifts on lorries. He was the sort of man nobody would miss, and I thought he would suit the plan I had in mind. I suddenly realised I should do it on the 5th of November, when a fire would not be noticed so much. I think it was the 2nd or 3rd of November when I searched out the man. He was having a drink of beer and we talked. When I said that I intended to go to Leicester on the Wednesday, he said he would be glad of a lift up there. I made an appointment with him on the Wednesday night, 8 o'clock. I met him outside the Swan and Pyramid. We talked a lot, but he did not tell me who he exactly was. I did not care. The man was half dozing, the effect of the whisky. I gripped him by the throat with my right hand. I pressed his head against the back of the seat. He slid down, his hat falling off. I saw he had a bald patch on the crown of his head. He just gurgled. I pressed his throat hard, and he did not resist. Alfred then loosened the feeding pipe between the petrol tank and the carburettor on the car, removed the jerry can from the boot, and doused the car and the victim in petrol, stepped back, and from a distance he threw a match, starting the blaze. He then walked quickly away, planning to travel on foot to Northampton before escaping back to London, but Alfred Brown and William Bailey saw him, and he knew that he could now be identified, and that his plan had already fell apart. He remarked in his confession, addressing why he never asked the name of his travelling companion, quote, there was no reason why I should do so. On the 10th of March 1931, Alfred Rouse was hanged by Thomas Pierrepoint in Bedford Jail. In the days leading up to his execution, his legal wife Lily and 2 of his mistresses took turns to visit with Alfred to say their goodbyes. The body of the unknown man was buried in the cemetery at St Edmund's Church in Hardingston. His grave was marked with a simple wooden cross inscribed, quote, "In memory of an unknown man, died November 6, 1930. A metal box containing newspaper accounts of Alfred's trial were interred with him. A new cross was erected in August 2022. The police attempted to get Alfred to assist them in identifying the man, but he refused, quote, as they had not helped him. But he did give them a general description, quote, 40 years of age, between 5'6" and 5'8", respectfully dressed in a light-coloured overcoat, with the general appearance of a clerk. He had a slight brogue and a boxing tattoo on his right forearm. He was wearing police boots that the man told Alfred were given to him by London police. He carried a sports diary. In May 2012, the family of William Briggs, a 23-year-old man who disappeared in 1930, approached Northamptonshire police inquiring about DNA testing in hopes that the unknown man was William. Scientists from the University of Leicester and Northumbria were able to obtain the archived tissue samples from the murder victim. Unfortunately, William was not a match. The team at the university put out an appeal for families of missing people from around 1930 to come forward in an attempt to identify the victim. To date, 12 families have been tested, but no familial match has so far been found. However, efforts are still ongoing to finally give the victim of the Blazing Car murder his identity back and reunite him with his family. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and let me know what you think of this case in the comments below, and I look forward to welcoming you in the next one.